Okay, my name is Howard Eber, and I am a recovered addict and alcoholic. This evening, as I mentioned, we're going to be just functioning on one cylinder. Steve couldn't be here this evening. We are in chapter 4, We Agnostics. We began last week, and we got, about a page or so into it. And one of the things we talked about was the title of the chapter, We Agnostics. Now, for a lot of years, I thought Bill was talking about those of us who acknowledged, like myself, that I was an agnostic. Agnostic means one who is without knowledge. AG means without. Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. One who is lacking in knowledge, one who is without knowledge, one who is without experience, beneficial experience with God. And that's who we're talking about. But what I've learned over the last couple of years is I believe, what I've come to believe is that we are all agnostics. Every one of us. There are 26 people here today, and I believe there are 26 agnostics here. Now, if you don't know, if you don't think you're an agnostic, in order to find out your current agnosticism, let me suggest something. You know that God has removed your obsession to drink and drug. You know that God has helped you to remove some of your defects or is in the process of doing that with you. And you know that He's there for you in many, many ways. But are you absolutely sure, absolutely certain that God is going to provide for you financially, emotionally, get that right relationship going for you, that it's going to come your way? Or do you feel that you occasionally have to step in and take over those rules to make things happen? And I think that's normal. And I think that's natural. As I understand it, I think Jesus told his closest disciples that those who wanted to follow him most closely were not to have any money and only the clothing on their back, a minimum of clothing, that they were to expect God to provide for their food, their shelter, etc. Now, who among us doesn't, from time to time, worry to some extent about finances, about money, about somebody near and dear to us who may not be doing well, who may be sick, and we feel we have to take it a step further and ask God for a particular outcome. Ask God that He relieve this person of their pain and suffering, that He heal this person. And that's perfectly normal and it's perfectly natural. But it's our agnosticism coming up and coming out. And to find your current area of agnosticism, consider the area of your life right now that is most unmanageable, where you have the most doubt, where you feel that maybe I need to get a little bit more involved in asking for specific outcomes, or maybe getting involved in doing or saying something or taking some action. And that's normal. And that's our agnosticism. And I think that this entire chapter is directed to every one of us, if we keep that in mind. Um, let's take a look at what we did last week is we collectively took the first step. Let's look at the first page, page 44, the first paragraph, about 4 lines down. There are two statements. It says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, and that's because of the obsession, or when you drink, and if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, and that's because of the allergy, you're probably an alcoholic. Now, we turn those two into questions. In order to take the first step, we turn those into questions. And the questions were, have you been able to quit entirely on your own resources? Second question is, do you have any control over the amount you take once you start? We must answer both. Now, prior to actually taking the step, we answer those questions. And then if you would, keep your place on page 44, and let's turn back to page 30 for a moment. And we're going to collectively, for those of you who maybe weren't here last week, we're going to collectively take the first step, because in a moment, we're going to take the second step. And if you go to page 30, the second paragraph has another statement, which we're turning into a question. The statement is, we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. And we're turning that into a question. Have I conceded to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic? Please, before we answer, bear in mind, he does not use the word surrender. The word surrender doesn't appear anywhere in the first 164 pages of this book. Bill uses a form of the word concession, to concede. And concession or concede is absolute, total, unconditional surrender. I surrendered lots when I was drinking, drugging, and even in recovery. I surrendered a lot of times. I only conceded one time, and that was the last time. So if we turn this into a question, I'm going to ask everybody to answer it. Have you conceded to your innermost self that you are alcoholic? Yes, there we go. Congratulations. You've all taken the first step. Now it's time to move on. So let's get back to page where we are now is on page 45. The bottom paragraph talks about some of the objections many of us might have had towards organized religion. I want to put up a couple of handouts, a couple of screen shares here, and if you want to take a snapshot of the screen share, you're welcome to do that. But this is a quote from Dr. Bob. And he said, if you think you're an atheist or agnostic, a skeptic, or have any other form of, and I love this, intellectual pride, which keeps you from accepting what's in this book, I feel sorry for you. That's what Dr. Bob had to say about agnosticism and our intellectual pride. But there are a few other things I did want to show you, so give me a minute. Let me find it here. We're talking about organized religion. Give me a second. Let me get it in up here. And Rob couldn't be here tonight, so I'm doing this all myself. So just give me a sec. There we go. Okay, now let me get this so you could see it. I've made up a sheet of kind of, it's like a journey, if you will, through the book concerning organized religion, how our thoughts about it might have changed as we go through the book. And since Bill talked about that on page 45, where we read last week, let me just go through it. On page 10, Bill said, with ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. Let me shrink this so if you want to take a screenshot, you can. I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me who was love, superhuman strength and direction, I became irritated and my mind slammed shut against such a theory. That's way back on page 10. On page 11, he said, to Christ, I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching, most excellent. For myself, I adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. Can anyone identify with picking and choosing spiritual principles that we might be willing to follow? How many of the 10 commandments are you ready to sign off on? Right? On page 11, he said the wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery, the religious dispute that religious dispute had facilitated made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. Page 28, Bill said, those having religious affiliations will find here nothing disturbing to their beliefs or ceremonies. There's no friction among us over such matters. Same page, He said, we think it no concern of ours what religious bodies our members identify themselves with as individuals. There should be that should be an entirely personal affair, which each one decides for himself in light of past associations or his present choice. Not all of us join religious bodies, but most of us favor such memberships. Some of us, on page 45, have been violently anti-religious. We just read that last week. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. But in a couple of pages, Bill's going to tell us, we who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice even against organized religion. And then on page 87, he says to be quick to see where religious people are right, make use of what they offer. And what they offer are spiritual principles that underlie every religion. I don't care what it is, Judaism, Catholicism, Buddhism, at its very core, at its heart, all of those religions, I believe, are about tolerance, compassion, patience, humility, forgiveness, love, and goodwill. And the difference between religions and what we're talking about, which is spirituality, is that religion is about a set of practices. You want to belong to that club? This is what you have to do. Pray like this, eat like this, dress like this, stand like this, kneel like this, etc. Spirituality is none of that. Spirituality is a set of disciplines. We need to have a discipline for God as well as for prayer and meditation. And the definition to apply to those terms comes from us, comes from you. How liberating is that? That we can identify our own conception of God and our own conceptions of what prayer and meditation represent. Let's go to the bottom of page 45. As I said before, the line I finished on was some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. I went searching for God in my late teens, early 20s. I went to a lot of different churches and Krishna consciousness and so on. And I was trying to find God, and I could not. My only experience with God was when I was 14. My mom died after a lengthy bout with cancer, and when I questioned why, what I was told by my dad, innocently enough, was God must have needed her very much. Now, that was mean, that was out of line, that was vicious. And if that's what God is about, I wanted no part of it. How could he need her more than me or my 9-year-old brother? So that was what some of my baggage, some of my misconceptions that I came in here with. And because your conceptions of God didn't work for me when I went to all of those different churches and so on, I mistakenly concluded that God was inaccessible to me. And that's what that last sentence means to me. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. When your conception of God didn't work for me, I thought God was just inaccessible. He wasn't available to me. Continuing, we were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. Now, Bill's going to go through a couple of old ideas, emotions, and attitudes that we have about religion over the next few pages. And he'll start here. He said, we looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, an inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. Skepticism just means disbelief. With deep disbelief, we looked askance at many individuals who claim to be godly. Askance just means to look suspiciously, to look with disapproval and suspicion. So we looked with suspicion and disapproval at many of the individuals who claim to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it at all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? And as I mentioned last week, and we'll say it over and over, Mark Houston was always cautioning that we have to stop trying to understand God. We have a brain the size of a teacup, and his is like the size of an ocean. How is a teacup going to fit the knowledge that exists in an ocean? It just can't. And he said, we have to stop looking for God because God isn't out here to be found. Page 55, and we'll get to it soon enough, tells us exactly where God is, deep down inside every one of us, and it's innate. We're born with that feeling, just like we're born with the ability to love. And what we have to do is clear away the clutter that's accumulated over our soul to let God out. It's not about letting God in or comprehending God. It's about letting God out and accepting that we'll never comprehend. We're too limited. Again, we got a teacup, we're talking about an ocean. So continuing, yet in other moments we found ourselves thinking when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Yes, we have agnostic temperament, have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. And I'm going to suggest you highlight the rest of the paragraph in pink, because these are promises. These are also directions for how to find God. Just let me take you back a little bit. Let's go to page 45. The paragraph I'm referring to is paragraph 1, says lack of power. That was our dilemma. I'm referring to the last sentence in that paragraph that says, but where and how were we to find this power? And as I mentioned last week, I added a third question, which is when? Where, how, where, and when were we going to find this power? Well, we're about to be told the first part of it, which is how were we to find that power? If you were here last week, you might have remembered that I made mention of the fact that over the word how, write page 46, because that's where you're going to find the answer to that. Over where, we're writing page 55, because that's where we'll find where. And when, see page 55 as well. But let's get back to the first question, which is how are we to find God? Here's his directions. Back to page 46, paragraph 1, that begins with, yes, we have agnostic temperament. I'm going down to the third line. We found that as soon as we were able to, please underline this and put the number 1 next to it, lay aside prejudice. It's the first thing we have to do. Put aside the things we think we know. Lay aside. He's not even telling us to abandon prejudice. It's a subtle point, but he's not saying abandon it. He's not saying discard it. He's just saying lay it aside. Put it over here in the corner. Keep it within reach, like your binky or your teething ring. So if you've got to grab it at any minute, you can. But lay aside the prejudice. That's the first thing we need to do. Then, and express even a willingness. Above the word willingness, put the number 2. That's the second thing we have to do, is lay aside prejudice. I'm sorry, first is lay aside prejudice. Second is be willing. Be willing what? To believe in a power greater than ourselves. We commenced to get results even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. We don't have to comprehend God because we never will. Next paragraph, rather long paragraph. I'm going to suggest you highlight all the way through. We generally use yellow for general purposes, but we're going to have a couple of notes and over highlights in this paragraph. So I'm going to try to slow it down so I don't lose anyone. Much to our relief, we discovered, please underline, we did not need to consider another's conception of God. That's spirituality. I don't have to consider, I don't have to accept your concept of God. Our own conception, and please underline, however inadequate, because it is inadequate. Remember, one of the things I believe I suggested last week when we were in the last chapter is we make up a list. Sit down with a pad and a pen and make a list of qualities, of traits that you would like your higher power to have. Forgiving, all-knowing, always present, loving. If you believe God is punishing, put that down too. Obviously, he's a Miles Davis fan because why else would Miles be here? Um, but the point is, whatever you believe is a quality that you would like your higher power to have. Write those things down. And once you have those things written down, you now have the basis for approaching that power because you now have a conception of that power. It's your conception. And that's why it's inadequate, because who the hell are we to define God? But we have to start somewhere. And even though it's inadequate, we start with that simple list of traits. And he said that was sufficient to, please underline, make the approach and effect the contact with him. Please underline, make the approach and effect the contact. One of the things we need to always be mindful of, as Bill tells us, when we tell our story, when we're asked to come up in front of a room and share our experience, strength, and hope, what we're really being asked to do is to tell how we were able to make the approach, affect a contact, and establish a relationship with our Creator. And we do that by walking through the 12 steps. So he's making reference to it here, but it's also something to keep in mind for when you tell your story. What was it like running on self-will? What changed? What happened? You had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. How did that happen? How did you go from being agnostic to searching for this higher power, to laying aside prejudice and be willing to believe in that power? How did you do that? And then once you came to a certain point, what did you do? You made a decision to pursue that power and launched out on a program of action and et cetera, through the rest of the steps. And that's what we're supposed to be doing when we tell our story. But getting back to where we were, to make an effect, to effect the contact with him, as soon as, what does as soon as mean? If I ask you to do this as soon as possible, I'm asking you to do something now, right? I'm not saying when it's convenient, when you get an opportunity. No. If I'm asking you to do something as soon as possible, I mean now. And so above as soon as, I put that word now. Now we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence. Here are some euphemisms, some other words for God: creative intelligence, spirit of the universe, underlying the totality of things. We began to be possessed of a new power, sense of power and direction, provided, may want to circle that word, there's the condition, there's always a catch, provided what? We took other simple steps, steps 4 through 9. We took the rest of those steps. So we recognized there was that power, and then we set out to find that power. And I'm going to ask that you over highlight the rest of the paragraph in pink, because these are promises. And please, this is one of my favorite parts of the book. I have it up here on the wall in front of me. I just love this part of the book. He said, "We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him." Hold the thought for a moment. Above the word seek, put the number 3, and please underline the word seek, because that's the third part of how we find God. Lay aside prejudice, number 1. Be willing, number 2. 3, seek him. In other words, take action. That's what we do. In step 3, we decide to take action, beginning with step 4, to seek that power. But let me read it again, because I love this section. He said, "We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him." You know who makes hard terms? Religions. Religions. And I'm not putting down a religion, any religion, but if you want to belong, there's certain behaviors you must follow. You have to eat a certain way, dress a certain way, pray a certain way, and so on. We were talking at the beginning of the meeting. Today's a Jewish holiday. What does it mean? It has no bearing on my life right now. I have my own conception of God, and it's not found in a synagogue or in a church. So, God does not make harsh terms for those who seek him. To us, the realm of the spirit, there's another way of saying God, is broad, roomy. Please underline those next 2 words, all inclusive. 1939 dictionary defines the word inclusive as containing all. Inclusive means it contains all. So our conception of God is what it can be approached by anybody. Never exclusive or forbidding. Forbidding in the 39 dictionary was defined as disagreeable. There's no harsh terms, there's no disagreeable terms about our conception of God, because it's our conception of God. If you want to be part of a religion, some of their harsh terms may be disagreeable. That's all he's saying.
And it's not all inclusive.
And it's definitely not all inclusive, absolutely. Or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. Please underline seek. If I'm seeking something, what am I doing? I'm taking action. Remember, 2 lines up, the third part of how to find God is seek, take action. It is open, we believe, to all men. And just to be politically correct, I've added and women after that. I'm not going to suggest you go through the whole book and do that, but in some places I think it's fitting. So I added it there. Okay, next page. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean, and please underline this, your own conception of God. How many people here, we got 27 people here, like to have things their way, right? You all like to have it. I'm not just talking about a Big Mac or a Burger King or something like that. We like to have things our way, right? Well, good news. Here's the only place in AA that we get to have something our way. Everywhere else, the book is filled with musts and requirements and directions. But here, you can have it any way you want it, as long as it makes sense to you. So when we say the word God, think of the conception that you have. We have to identify terms. We're going to be talking about this entity. So we use the G word because it's the most widely understood and recognized word. But if you have a problem with that word, you can use any number of alternatives, any number of euphemisms, and I'll show you some of them now.
Such a beautiful piece. I just love this.
Okay, these are euphemisms for God found in the big book and the 12 and 12, as a matter of fact. I'm working on a more comprehensive list because I found some others. But if you're not comfortable with the God word, try a power greater than yourself. Try Zara of the universe, creative intelligence. How about divine guidance, principle, father, the great reality? I've added number 24 because Waldo, I think this chapter should be renamed Where's Waldo? In the UK, I think you call it Where's Wally? You know, it's that cartoon with the little figure of Waldo, and there's a picture with all of these figures running around, and you have to find the little Waldo drawing in there. Well, isn't that what We Agnostics is about? Finding Waldo. I don't think God would be offended at that. If you do, don't use it. But be that as it may, we have these euphemisms. Pick one. Maybe it make it easier for you. Okay, continuing. This applies to, and let's underline this, to other spiritual expressions you find in this book, like prayer, like meditation. These are spiritual terms that we're going to be using, but we have to use a word to communicate. You define it. You attach the definition. What is prayer? Figure it out. What is meditation? Nah, I don't. That's personal. You figure it out. We have it our way. Continuing. Do not, and you may want to find a way to highlight or circle that in green because it's another way of saying must. Do not means you must not. Do not let any prejudice, and I above prejudice write old ideas, because that's what prejudice is. Old ideas we bring in here, the things we think we know. All prejudice is information, opinions gathered without any information or fact. But I probably forgot to point out to you that in this chapter, Bill uses the word prejudice 7 times. This is number 3. If we have time, maybe at the end we can go back finding the rest of them. But the word prejudice appears over and over in this chapter quite a bit. So don't let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms. Please underline spiritual terms, and maybe above spiritual, put the word religious. Don't let the prejudice you may have against religious terms deter you from honestly asking yourself. Please highlight and underline this: what they mean to you. It all begins here with an examination of our beliefs. Get rid of the noise. So we're going to ask ourselves, not what have we been told, not what have we been taught. What does God mean to you? What does prayer and meditation mean to you? Start with an examination of your beliefs. Again, not what you've been told, not what you've been taught. You get to have it your way. It's your conception. So what does that mean to you? That is incredibly liberating. At least I think so. So we start with an examination of our beliefs. And what are our beliefs concerning God? At the start, and you may want to underline that, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth. Doesn't say religious growth, spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him, first conscious contact with God. Afterward, and please highlight this sentence in pink, afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That's in pink because it's a promise. And I hope for all of you that afterward doesn't mean to you what it meant to me, because afterward to me meant 24 years later. It took me 24 years to find out and establish a relationship with my creator in sobriety, incidentally. Yeah, I had a relapse or two in the middle there, but the point is that I had some misconceptions, and it took me 24 years to understand that my misconceptions were about religion, and we're not talking about religion. We're talking about spirituality. And I had no idea there was any difference between the two. So, afterwards, after we accepted that we can have our own concept, then look what happens. We can begin to uh, accept many things which seemed out of reach before. That was growth. But if we wish to grow, we had to, and we had to is a must. So you may want to highlight that in green, to begin somewhere. And please underline, so it used our own conception, however limited it was. And if you haven't already made that list of traits, please don't let it go any further than here. Before you proceed through the rest of the chapter in the book, have a list. I'm not saying you take the time right now, but take 10 minutes, 5 minutes after the meeting, and just write out single word traits that you would like your higher power to have. And again, it's limited, but it's a starting point. We needed, I'm going to suggest you highlight the first three sentences, first three lines. We needed, that's a must. If you need something, you must have it. To ask ourselves but one short question. One question. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? This is the only step that Bill doesn't introduce and say, this is the first step in recovery, or this is the third step. But this is the second step. It's not hiding under a rock. And he asks us one question. The Hazelton Guide on step 2 has 100 questions. There's another fellowship, the NA fellowship, that has their step working guide that has 78 questions. If you weren't confused when you started, you sure as hell will be when you finish. 78 questions on step 2. I don't know how you could possibly do that, but they do. We have one, and here it is. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? And before we actually ask ourselves that question, let me put something else up here. What am I looking for here? I'm looking for step 2 questions. 2 parts of step 2. I need that. And that should do it. Okay, here's another graphic. We're breaking down step 2 to 2 parts. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves. That's part 1 of step 2. And it's addressed right here. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? That's the first part of step 2. The second part could restore us to sanity. Asks the question, can this power remove my mental obsession? What's bigger, God or my alcoholism? And on page 53, we're told either God is, or he is, or he is nothing. God is or he isn't, What was our choice to be? The answer to that question is going to be the foundation upon which we will base every decision we make for the rest of our lives. It used to be the foundation I made my decisions on was what's in it for me? What do I get out of it? Why should I do it? That's the basis for my decisions before. My basis for decisions now is what would God have me do? Is it consistent with those spiritual principles we talked about before? So those are the two parts of step 2. But let's now collectively take the second step. And the question is, do I now believe, or am I willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself? Yes. And I assume you all taken it. So congratulations, you've just taken the second step. And we're moving on. And I'm going to ask that you highlight in pink the rest of this paragraph. This page, incidentally, coming after the end of page 46, is an earth-shaking page for me. This page changed my life. There's one line in particular here that I felt as if I'd been struck by lightning when I first read it. And I felt everything open up. And I'll show you when I get to it. So let's highlight the rest of this paragraph in pink because it's a promise. As soon as a person, as a man, can say he does believe or is willing to believe, you may want to underline he does believe or is willing to believe, because you don't have to believe for the second step. You don't. We emphatically assure him that he is on his way. And you may want to add a few words after that. You're on your way to a spiritual awakening. That's what you're on your way to. You have to have a conception of that power because that's the power that's going to help you. And emphatically means to do something in a forceful manner, in an aggressive, forceful manner. It has repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. Bill is building this archway, the spiritual archway, and I don't want to take the time now to go to show it to you, but he has already built the foundation. Was step 1, foundation of the archway. Now he's talking about a cornerstone, and I'm not a mason, but as I understand it, the cornerstone is the stone that is used to keep the structure level and plumb and true. So the cornerstone of our spiritual arch through which we will walk to freedom is belief. That's the cornerstone. Willingness in step 1 is the foundation. Cornerstone is belief, step 2. That was great news for us. And please highlight the rest of the paragraph. Keep it simple. Except the last sentence. Don't highlight the last sentence yet. For we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles, underline spiritual, please, unless we accepted many things on faith, please underline faith, which seemed difficult to believe. Right away, I'm having a problem. I always thought belief and faith were the same thing. That was my prejudice, part of my prejudice, part of the baggage I brought in here. Faith, belief, it's tomato, tomato, it means the same thing. And when I read that sentence, it started to dawn on me that I could be wrong, that there clearly is a distinction being drawn. What is that distinction? What's the difference between belief and faith? Let's continue. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, please underline spiritual, not religious. We're being approached now with a spiritual concept, not a religious concept. So when people presented, and I personalized things in this paragraph. So wherever it says us, I wrote me. Where it says we, I wrote I. So in my book, it says, when people presented me with spiritual approaches, not religious, how frequently did I say, I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes. Okay? Belief is one thing. But I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith. Please underline faith. We've got belief, we've got faith. What's the difference? The last sentence, which I suggested you not highlight, I'm going to ask you to now highlight in pink. And this is the sentence that changed my life. The sentence says, it was comforting to know, to learn. Please underline that word learn, that we could commence at a simpler level. And that simpler level is belief. The second step says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. It doesn't say we came to know. It doesn't say we came to have faith. It said we came to believe. What's the difference? When I came in here, I didn't have faith. People told me you got to have faith or you're not going to recover. Well, I didn't have that. What I had was hope. And I didn't know that belief and hope are the same thing. Belief is hope. Belief is an expectation. Faith is certainty. Faith is knowledge. Faith is based on experience. And I had none of that. So when I was told I could begin, and I don't have to have faith, contrary to what people told me when I came in here, I don't have to have faith to start. I start with belief. And here's what happens. Based on that belief, I do something. I make a decision. And I make a decision to pursue that power that I believe, that I hope exists. And so when I make the decision to pursue that power, I begin a program of action that produces results. The result is I no longer believe. I know. I make a decision in the third step to take a plan of action, the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth step that produces a result. The result is revealed in the first part of the 12th step, which says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. That's the result. I don't believe anymore. I know. And that's the difference between belief and faith. Belief is hope. We all want more than that in the beginning. We want certainty. We want assurance. We want guarantees. I know I did. But we're not going to have that in the beginning.
That's what the recovered members done for us.
Yeah.
Again, and they showed us.
They showed us.
Possible.
Yep.
We got our own.
And that's what we based our hope on, right? That if they could do it, and I've heard their story and I've talked to them and they did the same crazy stuff I did. If they could do it, maybe I could too. Isn't that hope? That maybe I could do it too.
guaranteed you see it. Like it's not like you go to the doctor and they say this might work for this,
Yeah,
but you don't see the finished result. But if you see the finished result in someone that's recovered and the lights are on and they're awake, you're like, there it is, live in action. That's what I get.
that's it. That's right. Remember Bill and Ebby? And Bill said that when Ebby told him he can have a conception of his own of God, it melted that icy mountain under which he stood that blocked him from the sun, and he stood in the light at last. Ebby gave Bill hope based on, as Kathy said, himself. He could see, even if Bill had difficulty with the God concept, he can see living, breathing proof of what Ebby was saying. He's saying, I went through these activities, and the end result was, now he didn't say steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, because in those days, what they had was purity, honesty, unselfishness, and love. And so Bill asked himself, am I able to practice those principles? And if I do, I will have faith. That will be the result. With us, we work those steps. That's the plan of action that we take as a result of the decision in step 2. And the decision in step 2 is based on the hope in step 2. Decision in step 3, I'm sorry, is based on the hope expressed in step 2 that there is that light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to stop right there, and we'll continue next week. Let me turn the recording off.